Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the American Library in Paris. I am Rachel Donadio. I'm the curator of cultural programs here, and it is a great honor and a pleasure to welcome this evening Rachel Cusk and Megan Rooney in conversation. For those of you who haven't been to the library before, we are an independent nonprofit organization. We are the largest English language lending library on the European continent. We are a home for the thoughtful and curious and have been for more than 100 years, and we're delighted to welcome you here this evening. Rachel and Megan are here as the latest conversation we're having in our Ways of Seeing series of programming, which runs through June. It's a series exploring connections between literature and visual art. And so I'm thrilled to have Rachel, who lives in Paris, and Megan, who lives in London, come for this conversation about mediums and methods. We're going to be in conversation for about 45 minutes, and then Rachel will read an excerpt from her forthcoming novel, and we will, if we have time, take just a few questions at the very end. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers this evening. Rachel Cusk, as you all know, is the author of Parade, Second Place, the Outline Trilogy, the Memoirs, A Life's Work and Aftermath, and several other works of fiction and nonfiction. She's a Guggenheim Fellow, and she lives here in Paris. Megan Rooney is an enigmatic storyteller. Working across painting, installation, and performance, she develops interwoven narratives within which the gestural body is a uniting thread. Her layered canvases, built through cycles of erasure and renewal, function as capsules of time and memory. Rooney's work has been featured in solo museum exhibitions at Kettle's Yard, Cambridge, Salzburger Kunstverein, Salzburg, Museum of Contemporary Art, Toronto, and Kunsthalle Düsseldorf, in a two-person show with Joan Mitchell at the Espace Louis Vuitton, Beijing, and in group shows at the Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, the Lyon Biennale, the Palais de Tokyo, and the Venice Biennale. Please give both of our guests tonight a huge round of applause. Let's begin at the beginning. Both of you here, Rachel, in your two most recent novels, Parade and Second Place, you have artists as protagonists, and Megan, in your work, you've referred to works as people. You talk to the paintings while painting. We'll get into questions of practice and of perspective, but let's start at the beginning. Both of you grew up in your early childhood moving between countries. And I wonder how that helped shape your ways of seeing, how that helped shape you as people, as artists, and as observers. Whoever wants to take it away, take it away.
There we go. Does that work? Yeah. This was something that I thought we would talk about. I mean, not only because Canada is somewhere we have in common, which I think is, I mean, I was born in Canada and left when I was a baby, and so it's this sort of mysterious, mythical, unknown birthplace. And that felt like the beginning of, I suppose, less an experience of being uprooted or being rootless than of being condemned to observation. And so hearing Megan's story, I was like, okay, this is a kind of interesting idea that you are awoken into observation by being torn out of essentially what can be taken for granted. Anyway, thinking these thoughts, I then read something Megan said. I've written it down in an interview about her. About what creativity was, that she was a creator right from the start and loved making things and went to school and was good at art, obviously. And she says, I was so relieved there was something I could do that didn't involve having to talk to anybody. To have something that you didn't have to justify to anyone, at which point I actually wanted to put my head on the table and cry, because I thought somehow I chose language which was so the opposite, which was coming into confrontation and conflict with the world, having to explain everything, having to justify everything, having to say, no, it wasn't like that, it was like this, setting the record straight. So I think that and that idea taken across this same experience of endlessly being uprooted and moving to new places and I suppose experiencing that as language exposure, or experiencing language as exposure, suddenly seemed unbelievably painful as a history compared to going into this silence of I'm doing a painting and nobody disturb me, please.
Response. Good. Is this on? I mean, I think that that was probably my initial feeling of relief when I found something as a young person struggling to kind of fit in and find a way of being in the world that then felt very liberating, because it was something that you could do without having to kind of involve anyone else in. This sort of transfer of continents that my family went through, from Cape Town, South Africa, where I was born, to Rio de Janeiro, where my father was working in the music industry, to then a very small suburban town outside of Toronto, which was kind of like landing on the moon after the metropolis life of my parents were having in Rio. But part of that isolation or feeling of wanting to retreat, I think, came from my mother being in a position of isolation, not having work permits, being the person that was looking after us and having to put her career kind of on hold. So part of that upbringing that instilled in me the maker in me, I think, was also part of her story that kind of got splattered onto us. And then given my disposition as a person, it was something I could latch onto that made a lot of sense. But it also involves kind of a willful denial of participating to some degree in the world, which I don't know where that leaves us, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that actually part of this same experience of movement and upheaval, and you're a child, so you're not choosing and you have no control. But it's really, for me, was watching my parents struggle in whatever new setting. So we moved from Canada to Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles to an English village that had been richly fantasized and embroidered in my mother's imagination. So everything about LA only existed really to define the innocence and safety and unspoiledness of this same English village, where in fact the knives were out, day and night for incomers like my parents, and so I watched them sort of strung out on a barbed wire fence of sort of snobbery and social sniping, and I guess that, and also all our accents. We had American accents, and I mean, not my parents, but we did, but my parents were a little Americanized, and so hearing them trying to adopt the lingua franca of the English upper middle classes in a village in Suffolk really, really attuned my ear in a pretty sort of indelible way, which I think, again, in terms of being committed to the course of language, committed to that. It's so interesting looking at Megan's paintings in the context of some of the things she's said about them, and those as locations where the world is allowed to make an imprint, and that being something so slow, and so that a process of accretion and then of disappearance, but in the end, this sort of build-up of an impression or an imprint that doesn't have language in it, that actually is so close to personal experience, essentially, to a different side of consciousness than the one that I was endlessly, tortuously being attuned to. And I think, God, what would what would it have been if I hadn't tried to describe everything and to mimic everything perfectly, and to, my early work was very much a sort of Evelyn Warish satirical type of so English hierarchical sniping of exactly the kind that I had been exposed to at that age, and so yeah, you're sort of condemned to something without quite having chosen it.
Before I turn to Megan, this brings me to a point. You said, Rachel, in an interview a few years ago, I wanted to write the way one paints. And after reading that, I got in touch with you and I said, if you would ever like to be in conversation with an artist, that would be wonderful. And you said, I would like to be in conversation with Megan Rooney. And there's something about the process and the approach that Megan takes to paint that you found really engaging. And talking about this layering, I want to ask you a little bit to go a little deeper into what draws you to this idea of visual art and what can be done in images that can't really be done in language. And then I'd like to turn to Megan to ask about her process.
Oh, I mean, the image feels like something that if you're normal and if you have the normal pressurized invitation to join in with society and adopt its rules and do behave in the ways that it asks you to. The image is something actually that you almost it would take you your whole life to realize that everything could have been distilled into that, and that in fact it wasn't compulsory, this way of language. And so everything I have to say about it, everything I feel about it, can only be expressed as regret, I guess, of thinking how much more freedom and peace would have come by explaining the world in those terms and seeing the world in those terms. And the only thing that I wonder about, which I was going to ask, and I'm going to ask it now, is the one thing I've felt able to do in language is, as I said earlier, confront things and I suppose find a connection to social justice, to politics, to actually fight a bit and try and change things a bit. And that comes with its own risks, but it is something that can be done in the language economy. And I guess so my question would be, as a painter, do you feel that involvement or capacity to be involved, or even the kind of power to say something about things that are wrong?
Well, I think it takes a more indeterminate or indirect kind of route for me. It's not obvious what the fight is, but I mean, I think frustration is the most kind of common feeling in the studio, a frustration of trying to get the complexity of the world and the brutality of the world and the violence of the world and the beauty of the world and all of these things kind of coalescing to exist in something out of a medium that is completely ill-suited to any of those subjects. I mean, to ask the painting to be all of the things in which you as the maker of the painting, or at least for me, everything that I see and experience and process comes out in the surface. Something of that transfers through the body, through the subconscious, through the conscious, through the act of doing and undoing and breaking apart and rebuilding. And it wobbles around there. We drag our bag of narratives with us wherever we go. You can't rid yourself of that. The canvas is not blank. It comes to you with its own, for me, words can represent, but they can also evoke things that have no name, in the same way that painting, I think, belongs to this category of something ambiguous, something undetermined, something, you know, that defies definition. And language and art, it's where those things rebel against each other and are remade. That is the job. And I think it's a, you know, I don't ever know how that practically comes out, but if you engage with the world, as we all do, because art and writing is not made in a vacuum, we are, you know, we know what's happening in Venezuela. We know what's happening with our neighbors, in our cities, in our own bodies. It is in the work somehow. It's just layered and hidden and muffled, and the paintings are ill-tempered and bad-humored and aggressive, and also none of those things. Don't know.
I mean, the other...
I'm not sure that answers anything.
No, I mean, it really does, but it also... I imagine you have to have more faith in human, in the human individual than I do, because you have to have faith that they will work it out, and painting is very, very, very difficult to talk about. People find it. There's not a common language for it. It's something that I think, I mean, the big Rothko exhibition that was on here was sort of blockbuster thing, and we went a lot of times, and every single time it's absolutely rammed with people, and I did start to think, actually, if I turned to someone, or if someone turned to me in front of one of these canvases and said, "So what do you think?" I really thought, what would they say? What would I say? We're all here looking at this stuff, and actually, is what appeals to people partly a sort of enforced silence in the face of meaning, almost an impossibility of interpretation that allows a whole different set of responses that are possibly impossible to describe, or even that don't have, it's the part of yourself that doesn't have a language, that you don't have a language for, that maybe is aroused by these, and actually can kind of exist in silence. But it's a kind of, as I say, a lot of trust involved in that, rather than the cliche of someone going, "Oh, my kid could do that," which is what we're told human beings do in the face of art when they don't understand it.
Where do we go with that? I guess I do have an iota of faith that people are still able to look and think and not be prescribed the kind of point of the thing, for it not to be something didactic and that can be explained. I don't know how interesting it is but in my own personal journey as a maker, the route to abstraction was so long and meandering, and I tried my darndest to paint in almost every other fashion before I ended up with what is now, I think, kind of something that I am reasonably happy to say belongs to me. And there is a risk involved. I think it would be a lie to deny that wasn't also can risk being part or only understood within its own field. But things move in inches sometimes, and it I don't know, it still moves.
I was going to ask you about that in both of your work, but tell us about that move from figurative to abstraction. What was that process, and what was that transition for you, and what Why? Why what? Tell us, a little more about that.
God, it feels like a long time ago now, but more. I think it was just more. I was working more directly with the human body, my own body, the bodies of the women in my life, and representing them in paint. And eventually that moved into sculpture, partially because I think one of the things we don't really talk about is the economy of paint and of art materials being prohibitively expensive for the majority of makers. At all different levels, and it was too expensive to continue painting. Where after I finished my studies at Goldsmiths, and I had no permanent studio at the time, so I was working more with detritus and garbage that I found on the streets, and sewing together old bits of cushion and picking up bedding after raves and making grotesque figures. Out of them, that I was speaking to a friend and a colleague, curator, who had shown some of these works in a regional space in Scotland not too long ago, really. And eventually those things came back into the canvas, those subjects, the violence of things that I experienced as a young woman. And then again, I think through something that had to do more with necessity than choice, color kind of blew things in a different direction. And that was predominantly because here in Paris, I was asked to do this mural at Palais de Tokyo. I wasn't asked. I was asked to participate in a show, and I had no permanent studio to work in. And so I kind of pitched them that I would come and make something on site in 3 or 4 weeks. It probably ended up like 7 weeks, but that I would do something directly on the wall. And I started, I think I mentioned this the other night, I started in all the wrong scales, so I would have been there for 200 years trying to finish this painting. And everyone was watching, kind of looking a little horrified, like, oh my God, what is she gonna do here? And there was lots of figures had emerged, this band of mangled bodies, and suddenly color and abstraction started to emerge to deal with space, to deal with architecture, to deal with the limitations of my body. And then that came back into the studio, and I don't know. So it goes on. That's a condensed version of a long, painful story, but suddenly things feel more real to you. I think you only have your intuition as a maker in whatever medium, and you have to kind of be quite bullish about following that because there isn't anything else to follow.
And Rachel, this is something that you've talked about in your work, especially in Parade, your most recent novel, which is a very beautiful and mysterious and poignant work. There's a moment where a character says, it was about scale, David said. It was about the legitimacy for a female artist of producing large-scale works. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those ideas that you're grappling with in that book, and then also about, how you both have thought about scale.
I mean, that thing that you've just quoted is a sort of piss take of a piss take of a piss take of people talking about art in a way. And I guess the politics of I suppose what has seemed to me to be a medium that more than others perhaps has been very difficult for women to find their way into and be allowed into, and the various images of kind of absolute freedom, male freedom that we have of male visual artists, and so. I can't remember what your question was, sorry.
No, just how you're thinking about, scale and what kind of scale a woman should work with, whether that is in a book, or whether it's on a canvas or in a room.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, these things in literature. I mean, you know, there are some of the same. Is it the case that writing a big book, a long book, makes some kind of statement? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, is that a male? But the thing is, the novel has a very different history, and I think, you know, this terrain has just been so much better debated, in a sense, because we have helpful people like Virginia Woolf, who, you know, who essentially set the terms of the debate, and people are still having that debate. I think in you know, what I know is that in the literary world there is something that can clearly be defined as a set of male values, which indeed is what Virginia Woolf was saying. You know, that women can write men's books, and they're allowed to, and then they will possibly be, you know, admitted into literary culture and possibly even celebrated in the same way as men. But that doesn't actually. That is not a female literature. That's not women's writing. It doesn't actually dent or even scratch the surface of female reality and of advancing in some way towards an art or a form that might actually represent that. And, you know, in a sense, and I mean, there are, in fact, of course, examples of this in visual art, of women who literally had to, could only find a female art by living a female life, by, I don't know, dying in childbirth or not having any space, not having any money. Those, and I think in literature that also is very true. And really the kind of ground is broken by individuals being prepared to have much greater difficulty in terms of not just the circumstances in which they're trying to create, but what it is they're actually trying to say. Because you write your book about having a baby and everyone laughs at you. That's what happened to me, and so there's also that humiliation, I suppose, or exclusion from the kind of terms of success. So and I think in Parade I'm kind of looking at that as a possibility in or a different version of that in visual art.
Megan, as a visual artist, how have you thought about these questions of scale, from a mural to smaller works? Do you sometimes set out what size you want to express yourself in, or how do you choose how to basically scale what you're doing?
I think of myself more as a kind of construction worker, an excavator, than a visual artist, to be honest. It's kind of more about channeling into something and then trying to find to pull something out, to prod it out, to suck it out. The size often has to do with really my stubbornness. My wingspan size was born out of just it being absolutely the largest size I could carry around in my studio on my own without help. It's literally what I can get my fingers around on either end.
I love that.
And when it comes to taking on something like a building, Frank Gehry architecture of a room of 8, kind of unconsciously complicated, non-straight, wobbly walls that change direction, pace, size, shape every time they join together. It's always something that is ephemeral and destroyed at the end of the exhibition, partially, I think, because it's a way of getting out of the commodity of big scale painting. Of course, I also make big paintings sometimes. But I reserve those colossal kind of gestures for something that will be destroyed at the end of its life, which kind of announces something about radical impermanence as a way of existing in the world. And I think that is one tiny little prod back at the art market, art world system that kind of entraps and chooses to turn everything that we do into something capitalist and that can be bought and sold and has value, which is not why anyone makes anything.
Your process you've talked about is one of layering, sanding, drilling down, removing, revealing, excavating. When is a work done?
That's the age-old question. It's done for me when I am no longer needed to some degree, when I can comfortably step back and the painting is without my relationship to it anymore somehow. So at the beginning of the process, it feels incredibly open. It can be almost anything, and I hate this. And I want to accelerate through the beginning as quickly as possible. Also because the paint just feels and looks and smells and acts and behaves like paint, and I'm not interested in paint. The longer you spend on the surface, the more it does something question mark that becomes a being at some point to me, or it has a kind of presence or a soul or something. Again, here his language is like completely insufficient. I feel, or at least I'm not able to describe it. But for me, I think, yeah, it has to be a point where I don't want to add or subtract anything. And those paintings, I do think if you threw them out trucks or out windows, they would just kind of sprout legs and walk off. I don't think they then kind of belong to the world, and that's how art kind of, for me, goes into that realm where the other can have a chance to step in. Otherwise, it remains very closed, and that leaves the viewer kind of on the outside of the thing. And I do want the viewer to sort of come into it somehow. I mean, I think your writing does that a lot.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was thinking how interesting it is that constraint and almost the absence of, I mean, your description of deciding to paint the walls in an ephemeral, and that painting was going to be destroyed, or that work was going to be destroyed at the end, which is really a sort of a kind of constraint, because it's saying I'm not going to use structure, I'm not going to use concrete structure, and I'm not going to have the existence of the painting as an object to rely on. And I wonder whether, I mean, in my own practice, that sort of combination of getting rid of something or doing without something, in my case, narrative structure, also being experienced as a terrible constraint, well, not a terribly difficult constraint, that in fact to create something that doesn't have its being or find its being along the channels that have already been prescribed, which of course is, you know, what I always think is like the ultimate freedom of the visual artist is, you know, what are those channels, and but in fact you've just described one, and so I think that combined difficulty of something, of the getting rid of something involving so many extra rules, which is what I have discovered in everything that I've tried to do, that if I'm going to do a a non a non-novel, if I'm going to not have, I don't know, characters anymore, and I'm not going to have, I'm not ever going to say I again, or I'm the rule, the 1,000 new rules that then come from making that decision are really frightening, because like almost how can you, and I really like the idea of then destroying the thing you've done. I think that might actually be the answer, because it's sort of how, same question, how do you know when something's finished? B, like what is its existence if in fact what it's describing is something that's been taken away? Can't it just, I think almost the opposite of the thing getting on its own legs and running away. I think wouldn't it just sort of rot back into the earth in some way? I guess that in what I'm writing, I'm probably trying to get closer to that feeling of there being sort of nothing left behind by the book, almost.
With about 10 years of distance on Outline, which first came out in 2014, which is a novel where there's the very thinnest sketch of the protagonist, Faye, and we understand who she is through the people talking at her. Thinking back on that, what was that your shift from, figurative to more abstraction? And looking back on that, what do you think you wanted to do with that, and how did it get you into this new chapter, whatever chapter you're in or going in now?
I mean, that's an enormous question to which if I had an answer, it would be very, very long.
It can rot in the earth, right?
I mean, again, that was Megan hasn't spoken very much about these arts as a technology, essentially, which is something that really, really, I guess, an understanding that dawned on me in exactly that sort of just pre-outline period, which was finding existence so kind of violent and lawless and unfair and not worthy almost of this courtly effort to make a language for it. I'd rather have like smashed something up or broken something, or so in the end I had to think, like, how do I and I really did actually see it in terms of a picture. I thought, how do I take a picture of this thing that I want to describe? How do I how can I do it? And that question was not, it seemed, a question to me as an individual or as an artist. It was a question of the art. It was a question of the technique of writing and the technology of writing. And I thought, it should be like maths. It should be, if this system, this language system is what I think it is, you should be able to figure out everything in language if you just know the rules and have the right rules. And that was really a sort of massive breakthrough for me, because I thought, okay, here's what the rules would have to be to do what I want to do. And the book would have to describe itself. It would have to be it would have to be a surface that any person passing would be able to see that surface and see the book. And it could not rely on prior knowledge or the book knowing anything. Like the beginning of a book pretends it doesn't know what its end is going to be, for instance. Like all of that had to be gone. And I think that and then I found that it really actually was a technology, and it did work exactly like that. And I guess ever since then, that's how I've approached any writing project, that I've essentially, almost to a terrifying degree, experienced myself as two totally separate people, one of whom is this technical person who writes things, and the other has to go and live and kind of get the content. but it's the other one who increasingly works out how to write the book.
Megan, that's a fascinating answer. Megan, as an artist and a maker, maybe we'll shift to talk a little bit more about color. And I just wonder, or if you want to talk about, you're working on yellow and blue, and has that been? Do we even have words for why you're exploring those colors? I mean, how can you talk about where your work has been recently and where you're pushing it now?
Yellow and blue was a while ago. I've moved on from yellow and blue. I always start with a kind of dumb idea, and then just fly with it. There are no rules, and yet you have to make a kind of rubric for what it is that you are exploring. And I think that for me is something I'm just trying to get one step ahead of my paintings so that I know a little bit more than they do. It's quite funny when you say something you said about, like, the book, at the beginning of the book, it pretends it doesn't know what the end is. And I think in painting, you have to willfully, in my case, not think about the end, because you'll never get there. It will just never, ever, ever happen. And you can't look at any other work that you have made in your life and find a way to do it again, because I have no formula. And this is probably a big problem for the way that I work, which is why I produce relatively few works, because I work out what the whole thing is going to be in the process of it becoming whatever it is. And you have to kind of see the value in the thing that you weren't expecting, because the process isn't about the gesture or the dance aspect of the choreography of the painting, and it's not really about the colors. It's not about the formal relationships.
Is it true that colour is the ending? That colour is the end? Because that's sort of what I feel looking at your stuff. I think the colour is the...
in the end, it decides.
Is the final, yeah.
Yeah, I use the colour to find the form. But how that actually happens, I think, is as befuddling and mysterious to me as it is to anyone looking at the work.
But isn't that actually...
I think it's I'm just a really incompetent painter that continues to throw myself at a thing that I'm trying desperately to understand that I don't understand.
Isn't that so close to existence, though? It's so close to experience that you think you're trying to see, because you can look at this and think this is nature. These are nature paintings. You could easily think that, and I think that is, people think they know that nature exists, but in the end, all of their living is about being a body, being a person, and that maybe the final realization is, if you can get there, that you are nature, and that these colours come from you, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I always wondered whether or not it counted if the only thing the painting has to survive is you. Does it count? I don't know. But yeah, I guess it's what you choose to do with your life. In our conversation a few days ago, when I was trying to think of kind of how language fits into the way that I paint, or how I see those things kind of coalescing, and it's so hard to kind of pin down. I know it's there because for me, writing and literature and poetry, it's like the lifeblood of the world. And I know that the force inside of me that somehow compels me to make something visual also derives some aspect from text, from books, from, I can see the images clearly in my mind of your work that permeate in the back of my subconscious when I'm doing. But it would be impossible to kind of spell it out exactly how and where and how it fits in. But it does.
This is getting good. Like in therapy, things are getting good just towards the end of the session. But I think I want to, in the little bit of time we have left, you wanted to read a short something. If you would still like to, you're welcome to. And then Rachel will read a little from her forthcoming book. So
I feel shy to read it now,
okay.
but I think I'm going to, because I do think it's kind of a nice.
It's completely.
It's yeah.
I want to, yeah, we can let you read.
It's right at the beginning of this book. I did read the whole book. You girls twins, he said, when I handed it to him. And I said, oh no, sorry. I have to go
what is
forward
this, by
a little
the way?
bit. I'll tell you in a second. Next day we didn't go to class. It was the day that we took possession of what we'd bought and saw it hoisted with pulleys and a winch from the street up to the deck of our apartment. It was wrapped in thick pads, very dusty, and the winch creaked and curses rang out, and dignity was nowhere about. And I watched from the street because I wanted to be there if it fell. But Judith watched from the deck, and she was there when they put it down, legless, on its side, and I was there too, all out of breath in a few seconds later, and watched two men named Otis and Carl put it on a dolly and roll it out into our living room and screw the legs onto it and push it to the wall we'd cleared for it. Then Otis picked up the pads and the dolly and took them out and hooked them onto the winch, and Carl looked the apartment over and us while I wrote him a check. You girls twins, he said when I handed it to him. And I said, no, cousins, German, as a matter of fact. And he left, and so did Otis. And Judith and I were suddenly alone with it, all black and scrolled and three-legged and ours. And we were quite shy in the face of it, feeling all the weight of commitment and not being able, either of us, to find much to say. And I wandered around the place, in the bedroom, back to the living room and out to the deck, and Judith was a bit standoffish too. So we ran some. Then we went around noon to the university, to the practice rooms and the music lockers, and Judith brought back a pile of music and began the preludes. And I didn't do anything else all day. I just listened, and I knew how good she was, and I knew what a piano we had. And later that night, when she quit playing and came out onto the deck where I was looking at the lights and listening, she said, "We ought to live this way, don't you think?" It was as if I'd been waiting my whole life to hear her say that. And I said, yes, oh yes. How could we imagine it ever being any other way? Let's never get stuck with outsiders, just be ourselves and keep it honest now that we've got this piano. And we stood leaning up against the rail of the deck, looking at the lights below and the stars above, and the lights thicker and brighter, and the stars cooler and more separate. And I remembered how bright the stars were on the summer nights at the ranch, with no ground lights to dim them out. We even had our own stars. I'm going to skip forward here a little bit. We could live in someplace else, couldn't we? I heard her say. We could live in Paris. We would look as much alike in Paris as we do here. But it wouldn't matter, they'd overlook it. That's why people go to Paris. You know, and you could start writing that thing. Start writing what I said. And I could feel my old chip in its place on my shoulder. The thing you threw away, she said very simply and unemphatically, as if she thought I shouldn't have. And almost immediately I gave up the chip. What about you, I said. What work would you do? And I didn't get any faster, but I got one that must have I didn't got any more of an answer, but I got one that must have taken her a great deal to put into words. She knew what she wanted, she said. At least she thought she did. And it wasn't anything very hard and specific, like giving concerts or having people pay to hear her. It had more to do with belonging to a tradition in music and staying in it and working in it, in any capacity you could find to fit into. Playing what's being written and writing and composing too, if you want to and if you can, but mostly just trying to keep it alive and separate the chaff from the grain and keep them separate, which is which, and to care, and that is a life's work. Sorry, I've read that very poorly, but I think that's kind of it. It's Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker. It's written in the 30s. But I think it's, for me, it was something I read a long time ago. But part of realizing that you could belong to a tradition and that your life's work could be about trying to find some way to keep it moving forward inch by inch, or to participate in it, however small that contribution was.
Amen.
Amen.
Rachel, we would love to hear an excerpt from your as of yet unpublished.
So maybe no questions. I'm going to read my stuff instead. Sorry. Hopefully this won't take too long. It's that much. So yeah, this is from my new book, world premiere.
Does it have a title?
It's called Life of M. And I guess all I can say is this is me quite far down a road of trying to write much more intuitively, or anyway, doing something different. In the midst of our lives, we sometimes wake in the darkness and hear the sound of our own heart thudding in our ears. There is a moment of blank emptiness before the memory of who we are and of all we have done and have yet to do slowly begins to fill us. The waste collectors come early, before it is even light. In their big truck, they rampage noisily through the dark streets, pausing at each building in turn. 2 men drive while the others ride on the back. At each stop, they hop off before the truck has fully come to a halt. They aren't trying to save time. This flourish is something they are offering to themselves. They fan out over the street in the darkness and perform a choreographed routine, some wheeling the plastic municipal bins out into the road while the others attach them to the truck's rear forks. The forks lift and upend the bins over the belly of the truck, then jerkily set them back down, empty. The street lamps rain their yellow haze over the truck and over the men and the municipal bins, gilding their movements. Overhead, the sky begins to lighten to a deep and jewel-like blue. The men return the bins to the foot of the building. They do this slightly carelessly, for the bins are now light. Ahead of them on each road, the heavy waiting bins are neatly aligned, while behind them the empty bins are all askew, like the discarded shells of things whose meat has been taken. The men wear high visibility jackets. They are vigorous and graceful as they ride the truck through the dark dawn, their bodies erect, their faces lifted to the air. Their high spirits seem to derive from the prosaic honesty of their occupation. When they go on strike, the city is rapidly crippled. It sits stewing in its own mess, helpless. The men obtain a certain dignity from this fact. The noise of the truck fills our room as it passes in the darkness. It is a diabolical sound of shrieking metal and grinding gears, of shouts and the violent sounds of impact. There is nowhere in the city where this noise can be escaped. It comes to each place in turn like an angel of death. Sometimes it is comforting, and sometimes it is maddening. The sound of our own heart thudding in the dark silence is neither of those things. In the morning we go out to meet our friends, washed and dressed, the night trailing behind us like an animal's tail. We are in the midst of our lives, and we talk about what we see there, what we feel, the events that have occurred, and what they might mean. Each friend is different, and we don't always remember that until it is too late. At other times we do remember it, and then the friend is different in another way. They too are in the midst of their lives. The cafes are crowded, and it can be hard to concentrate. This exchanging of the news of ourselves can be effortful. The task of translating ourselves into language above the noise seems like an old-fashioned mechanism for which someone will soon invent a rapid modern alternative. We find ourselves looking at our friend's mouth rather than their eyes. Sometimes we expect an intervention, a tap on the shoulder, or a hand clap, or a voice, telling us to wake up, telling us that the moment is now. Our friends do not often share their sorrows, yet nor do they seem to be hiding anything. It is only afterwards, when we have left the cafe, that a question seems to shimmer unasked around the memory of the time we just spent with them. We wish that we could see them as a hidden camera would see them, alone at home, when they thought they were unobserved. It feels like only then would we actually know them. Sometimes we bump into a friend unexpectedly in the street, and their face before they look up and notice us is always shocking. It is the face of this other that only the hidden camera could see. It is filled with a strain and a preoccupation that vanish the instant they recognize us. They are a little embarrassed. They know that something of their private existence has been seen, yet we feel more love for them having seen it. The city is filled with tourists. They are not soldiers or protesters, yet they fill the streets, bringing everything to a standstill. They are not refugees, yet they move in columns, burdened by their belongings and their children. They are displaced, but they are at home. It is they who displace what was there before. They are a force of occupation. They wander the city with a casual possessiveness, talking as if they were still at home, as if the city and its occupants had been conquered, and their sensibility was no longer of any relevance, just as the new owners of a house wander rooms they now believe to be theirs. It is frightening, this mindless possessiveness. We too have believed ourselves to possess things, have established ourselves without thinking of who was there before. We wonder whether we will be punished for these errors. We see suddenly that everything we have could be taken away from us. We walk our dogs beside the river, striding quickly next to the water. Our bodies need to be exercised. Our bodies are not young, and they are not old. They are in some sense ageless, or perhaps simply obsolete. Since they have performed their reproductive function, they no longer need to live in coordination with time. Our control and maintenance of them is our own choice. We know people who do not take care of their bodies, and who live openly amid their decay. These people often seem happier and more at ease. They seem contented with their mortality, as though their body were their long-time companion who has stuck with them through thick and thin. They are not severe with it. They don't discipline it as we do. We walk far and fast all along the riverbank. The water is opal-coloured, streaked with brown. It is a big body of water, and so it appears motionless. Yet here and there clumps of plants can be seen far below the surface, their long fronds stretched out and rippling madly and silently like hair in the force of the current. There are many bridges over the water, and we pass beneath them one after another. Underneath each bridge is the stink of urine and the detritus of human occupation. Soiled bedding, empty wine bottles, sometimes a solitary shoe. These scenes seem somehow composed like stories or photographs, yet their subject is missing. The dogs would like to sniff around them, but we don't permit it. Often we see other dog owners standing indulgently under the bridges amid the stink of urine while their dogs sniff. The day moves into its broad middle section. The light over the river is flatter. The cruise boats with their loads of tourists ply to and fro, raising great furrows of brown water. Our attention to ourselves becomes more diffuse. We forget ourselves, and our thoughts branch away into other things. Our bodies send us small reminders for food and water, for greater or less warmth, for help with some minor discomfort. Time has carried us away again, as the river carries the stray twigs and leaves and plastic bottles that occasionally strew its surface toward their unknown destination. Not much left. In the evening we flower. Like strange nocturnal plants, we put out our display. Our personalities, summoned out of the disparate corners of the day, walk out on the stage. Even if we spend the evening at home, this feeling of integration, of our interior and our exterior fusing together, occurs. Yet later, waking in the night, that integration appears false. Our personalities seem like strangers to us. It is this self, unanchored in time, breathing in the darkness, that is real. All the same, the evening contains information, and we gather it. We go out, we see things, we meet people. We go to parties or are offered food in people's houses or watch performances. We talk or we listen. We are not looking for change. We do not, as we did when we were young, see the evening as a mysterious kingdom in which we might meet our destiny. We do not invest our hopes in the unknown. Since we ourselves are known, the unknown no longer promises us anything. We would have to become unknown again ourselves in order to receive it. The time when things happened seems to have passed. There was a time, a long time, in which reality served to delight or astonish us. It could pick us up and whirl us into something new. It worked without warning. It could intrude on our plans and forecasts in the most unexpected ways. This was because we had less control over the things that happened to us. We had fewer choices and less knowledge of the choices we had. Sometimes it was unpleasant, the intrusion of reality, and sometimes it was wondrous or hilarious. We have memories and stories we can tell about those times with their mishaps and surprises. Now it feels as though an intrusion could only signify violence. We do nothing to court that risk. We stay close to what is known and reliable. We do not indulge our hopes nor wait for news. All at once, we suspect that the only news from now on will be bad. Sometimes in the evening, we find ourselves conversing with someone more deeply or sincerely than usual. Something around or between us falls into place and aligns. The words become a kind of song, a harmony, each of us singing our part. We relax and let it come out, this song of ourselves. For a while, singing this song, we are at home in time. It is late. The lighting in the room is warm and dim. There is darkness at the windows, flecked with little bright points of golden reflection. We are like islands in that darkness, our lights glittering at one another from our separate shores across the Black Sea.